With the success of a new product increasingly reliant on capturing the latest craze, the ability to forecast new trends is increasingly sought after. Today on Lokad TV, we're going to discuss whether with the rise of social media, this is now possible, and also what companies can do to take advantage of those early signals. So Johannes, today our topic's all about forecasting those early signals. So what's kind of the idea behind this?
I would say the idea, as it is presented by many software vendors, I would say at least, is the idea that by leveraging, large data sources that extend beyond what the company has, you can basically know the future a bit earlier, to have a glimpse into more distant future just a bit earlier. And I would say the archetype of this idea of early signal would be to detect that something is trending on Instagram because there is some celebrities who are now wearing a new type of garments, and then bam, you can use that to anticipate a month ahead that there is like an oncoming trend or something.
Okay, so when we talk about those data sources, we're talking about maybe social media sources. Is that the right sort of data to be looking at?
At least that's what many, I would say, AI-driven, supply chain optimization vendors would say, I would say.
Okay, and in practice, how well does this actually work then?
As far, forecasting early signal based on external data sources, I would say at present time, there is basically, as far as I know, there is nothing that even remotely closely work for supply chains, not even close. The idea is that you can go into social media and just extract relevant data there. It's just, I think, an illusion. It's people who are pretending to do that. They have never seen the fact that the bulk of the traffic on those social media are not even done by people, but by bots, robots. So it's very, very hard to figure out what's real and what's not real. I mean, even advertisers, so people who pay for print, have it's very, very, very difficult for them to even sort out what is real from what is not real, and they are paying boatload of money to get to push ads on those platforms. And even when you pay for every single impression, and thus you're very desperate in making sure that it's actually real people with real eyeballs that are looking at those ads, it's even for those people it's very, very hard. So imagine that if you're just a vendor who is just collecting terabytes of random traffic data. I mean, what you get is just that a lot of randomness, a lot of noise actually. So the idea that you can automatically forecast trends based on that, I would say maybe some extreme situations, yes, but they are rare, so they are not very interesting. Maybe and then the sort of information that you would get would not nearly have the granularity of that you're interested in. I mean, yes, if your granularity is I want to predict who is going to be among the top most 50 popular artists in the US this year, yes, that you can have an early signal by just looking at those social media. That will give you a clear picture ahead of time of who, at the end of the year, is going to be the biggest artist of the year or something. But if you actually try to get an information such as how many T-shirts of this size, this color, this pattern am I going to sell in this region of the US, then that's a very, very different challenge. And here, I would say, mostly you're not going to have information that is nowhere near the quality of information it takes to translate what you get from those external data sources into something that would kind of make sense supply chain-wise for producing goods and distributing them.
Okay, and so what's kind of the issue in terms of the quality of data? Because you mentioned there's sort of lots of robots and stuff on these social media platforms, but still we're going to see kind of those posts which have got kind of the most likes are going to rise to the top. They're going to be kind of the ones that are most visible. So in terms of data, why is that not interesting then?
I mean, the problem is that, again, in supply chains, your productions are organized by, let's say, SKUs. You're producing SKUs of something, and then you're selling those products maybe through a bundle, through complex marketing channel, etc. I mean, no matter which tweets get retweeted a million times, or which Instagram picture gets looked at a bazillion times. There is no direct match between that and any of the SKUs that you produce or distribute. People very rarely include the UPC code in their tweet and saying this product with this barcode is really top notch. So usually it's very fuzzy, even when it kind of looks like obvious, even if you have like a superstar that tweets, oh, this new pair of shoes is super cool. Some people might actually look at the shoes and just interpret the color. Some people will think about the shape. Some other would think about the brand. Some other might interpret that it's actually, anything that looks like that. So it can be, it's again, it's very fuzzy, and it's not. And when you compound that the fact that usually there is a lot of interaction, so it's not, you can't just look at one post and say this is it. Usually it's just like it's a series, there is interaction. I mean, it's intended for humans. The quality of the response matters, because what if someone posts something that has like a bazillion retweets, but basically the retweets are super critical or sarcastic? Again, you can have sentiment analysis, but you're entering a realm where it's very difficult.
Okay, so
very, very difficult.
It certainly sounds challenging from probably the social media perspective. But are there any other sort of early signals that we could look at? I mean, we spoke about weather on a previous episode. So what else could we look at?
Yeah, I mean, usually, if you just look at the data of the companies themselves, there is a lot of data there. And you can try, by looking at the data that companies already have, to basically have a sharper view of the future. That's typically the approach that Lokad does. Then when it comes to having like a true early signal for something that is, I would say a tail event, or something that is a bit out of the ordinary, it's very, very difficult. I mean, yes, if you have like a very good forecasting model, you can have a signal that comes a bit earlier, but there are strong limits to that. I mean, just because first, a better forecasting model usually, I mean, that has been the Lokad experience, is that you want stability. I mean, if you have a forecasting model, even if it's a probabilistic Lokad, we favor probabilistic forecast, but no matter if it's a classic forecasting model or probabilistic one, you still want to have something that is fairly stable, so that's something that doesn't, go crazy up or down just because you have one more day of data. Why? Because again, supply chain need a plan that is relatively steady to execute. You don't want, just because you have a bit of noise in the market, to just shift gears, right and left. It's going to disrupt your production, your distribution channel, and everything. So. And usually, dominantly, it's just that. It's just noise. So a good, forecasting technology is not going to go crazy just because you have one more day of data. For the vast majority of situations, it's just business as usual, with just a minor course, a minor inflection in your course. So the problem is that if you have like a forecasting engine that becomes like super, super responsive, you end up with tons of false positive, where you say, oh, I have an early signal for something, you should dramatically change course. But 2 weeks down the road, oh no, sorry, it was just like an artifact or a bump. And no, it was like a wrong move, and it's very costly. So you can be better. You can marginally, detect things a bit earlier. And at Lokad, during the last decade, we have made progress, but it's very marginal. We are very happy when we had something where we were able to detect, something that would happen that was like a disruption, and it just take only a few days, and maybe when I say a few days, like 10, and maybe if we can do it with only 7 days, and we can analyze that it's now that there is something fishy going on that needs a response, that's very good. But what we are talking of shaving a few days off. That's where you can have. Can we do better? Very, very difficult. And again, when I say forecasting of the signal, I'm assuming that you're already seeing the signal. So if you rely on companies' data, it means that somehow the sales have bumped up or down, or something did happen already. So in this regard, you're still reactive to the problem.
Okay, and obviously, sort of, you talk about that sort of slight bump being the majority of cases, but there's those occasional times when there's kind of a large bump. So a good example here is what happened with coronavirus. So surely it's good to have an early signal for these types of scenarios, and what can you do if you have one of those early signals? Surely that's beneficial.
So first, I really challenge that you can have an early signal for something like, I would say an extreme tail events like COVID-19. Most people have been very puzzled by the way events unfolded. It was very haphazard. There was no clear, consistency across countries, even sometimes across regions. By definition, outliers are just very, very hard to predict in general. So I really challenge the fact that you can really predict that. And even more so, I challenge the fact that a forecast, even if you had 2 weeks of head start on forecasting something like COVID-19, would have this forecast really help? And again, I challenge also that. Because one thing about, and that's I think the crux of the probabilistic vision with regard, and we discussed that in tail events, is that when it comes to tail events, the idea is that you can't really predict them. It's pretty much by design, it's very, very difficult because it's going to be new and surprising. But what you can do is have your forecasts that, your probabilistic forecast, you need a probabilistic forecast that always puts some % of probabilities on things that are just wild. And so it's not as if you could anticipate COVID-19, is that it's as if you were saying, well, next quarter, there is like a 1% chance that business is going to be half of what it is right now, or half of what it was last year. Why? I don't know. It's just a possibility. It could be a war, it can be a pandemic, it can be maybe a massive recall, maybe a smear campaign online against a brand. I mean, whatever. Things, a massive fraud that has been discovered that makes, anything. So I would say, is it reasonable to say that for most companies, you have like a 1% chance for every quarter that sales get halved during the next quarter? I would say for most companies, yes. I mean, it means that 4 times per century, a massive disaster happened. I think it's fair. If we look at the 20th century, it was more than that. So you need, I would say, rather than early signals, which are just almost impossible, it's more like, again, probabilistic forecasting where you put a fixed, probability, a low probability, but still there, on extreme events, and then you prepare yourself against that, knowing that this can happen anytime, and when it will happen, you will assume that you will have no warning. But good news, if you have, for years, if you had this probability in place, it means that you've done, small adjustment that if this thing happened, you're kind of prepared, but it took, years of preparation, making a good use of your resources.
We always speak about this idea of being kind of reflexive to what's kind of going on in the world. Are there any industries that you've seen that are classically kind of slow in their reactions that could kind of benefit from maybe having an early signal kind of approach?
That the thing is that most of the industries that I've observed, actually, even if you give them an early signal, they would not do anything with it. And the reason being is that until you reach a point, and that brings the question back to, to this quantitative supply chain vision, where the point number 4 is about having like full robotization of your data pipeline so that you can generate your decision. You see, what happens in most companies is that the forecasting element is just one step of the process that ultimately lead to decision being taken. The decision being things like, should we buy more from suppliers? Should we produce more? Should we actually move the price up or down? But the reality is that for most companies, the process to turn forecast into actual decisions is very, very manual. And thus, in my perspective, very, very slow. So imagine you've invested a lot in tech to basically get an early signal, maybe 1 week earlier. 2 weeks earlier if you're very, very good. That's the sort of things that you can get with the technology as it exists right now. Maybe again, there might be edge cases where you can have, to see something 1 year in advance, but I doubt in this case that it's like a statistical forecast. It's more going to be high-level insight about an evolution of the market. I'm just talking of things that are like driven by numbers, with statistics. In this sort of situation, you have your early forecast, but are you going to act on it? And usually, if the consequence of having like an early signal is just shooting an email to somebody's mailbox in your company or whatever, or even worse, expecting that this somebody will actually go to an app, it can be a web app or a desktop app or whatever, just look at the alerts. I mean, nothing will happen in a short amount of time. It's going to be sluggish. And again, supply chains are by nature complex, distributed, it's many people, many systems, many machines across many locations. So, and usually if you want to have like a good supply chain response, you need coordination. And unless there are like a super high degree of automation in place, coordination is going to have like real people that are just going to make phone calls frantically all over the place. And usually it's going to take time. And when I say times, typically weeks. But bottom line is that I see that as an illustration that if you have an early signal, but you don't have a fully automated process that turn your forecast into decisions automatically, and I really say automatically without human intervention, basically the vast majority of the potential gain from the early signal will be lost in the inertia of the people who are trying to turn those forecasts into actions.
Yeah. And then I guess one of the problems with kind of these early signals is the amount of confidence you can actually have in the results. I mean, like you said, they're often fairly noisy. Do you think in the future we could get to a stage where the technology is in place that you can have more confidence in kind of the results that we're getting?
No. No, I mean, and the reason is that, again, what does that mean, more confidence? I mean, the path, especially the path that Lokad has taken for the last decade, was probabilistic forecasting. And probabilistic forecasting is to embrace the fact that the future is fuzzy. And this fuzziness, this uncertainty is irreducible. So if you expect that you will have like a magical computer system that will tell you, this is the lottery number, the winning number for the lottery, this is it. 100% chance. I know that doesn't work like that. Those systems, I mean, at best, what you can have is just something that will give you probabilities. They will tell you, yeah, we are facing a situation that is that start as being like a 1% chance being like a tail event. So it's like nothing about the situation. It's like 1% chance all the time that you're already in a extreme situation that you've not even realized that. And then maybe you start seeing something off. And then the next day, this 1% estimate bumps up to 1.5. Should you do something? Maybe not. And then the next day, it bumps up to 3% chance. That's an exponential growth for you. You're doubling your probability, but it's still very, very slow. And then next day, it's 6%. Should you go crazy because there is like 6% chance? Because this 6% chance is going to happen like, that we are talking of something that was only supposed to happen, once per 25 years. And here we are like something that would happen, maybe once every 5 years or so. But it's again, this is just, a bump. And the idea is that those probabilities are very fuzzy. And if your decision, system is well engineered, the things that transform those probabilities into the decision, it will basically gradually reflect that the risk that was at 1% is now 6%. So it will steer a little, but just a little, the decisions into a direction that make it more, protective for your company, but without going crazy. Again, you don't want to have like something that just drives your supply chain crazy by making like wild move in changes. And maybe the next day, things will go back to 3% estimate, from 6 to 3, because actually it was maybe a false positive, or maybe it will keep increasing. But you see, that's a sort of good response that you can have from a fully automated data pipeline. And then if you have like supply chain scientists on top, and they are seeing the news, they have high-level understanding, and they see that something like a big wave is coming, like a coronavirus, then you can actually have people that will, on top of that, kind of twist the numerical recipe itself so that it takes, a bit of extra human insight to steer the system into a better direction.
So if you're a supply chain practitioner who's kind of watching this, should their main focus be on, if they want to respond to these spikes in demand, on fully automating their processes instead of worrying about what happens maybe earlier on in the process? They should be looking at maybe how they respond to it in a more
exactly.
quick kind of manner.
You have to assess how much, how many days of agility are you going to win. For most companies, I would say, with a better forecasting technology, maybe like the one of Lokad, let's say, how much can you save? Maybe a week, maybe two, compared to, a moving average. Maybe you have like better forecasts, so it might count as a little bit, something a little better, maybe 4 weeks if your company was very bad at dealing with seasonality or something. But if you didn't have like a dysfunctional, process in place, probably we are just talking of a few weeks. But when it comes to decisions, I frequently observe that companies can waste up to a quarter to kind of get their act together and accept, a new reality. So it's and that can be very, very slow. And even, I've seen even fast fashion companies where the decision process was even in super reactive businesses like fast fashion, where it was taking like 6 weeks to transform the forecast into a decision. And I'm taking to a decision, and then you still have to produce, to transport, to distribute. It still takes time. So really, I think on average, for the vast majority of companies, it's a much safer bet to say we are just going to first eliminate the lag that is between between forecasting to decisions by just putting all those things together into one automated process, and then figure out how they can have like super advanced forecast where they can shave a few more days or weeks if they are lucky.
Okay, great. We'll have to leave it there, but I guess now we can use social media without knowing that companies are watching everything we do.
Oh, they're watching. It's just nice. So it just makes some analysts happy, but they don't turn it into anything actionable.
Great. So that's everything for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Bye for now.